Hey guys, thanks for coming back and joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. Glad to have you back. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to break a dopamine addiction. So, dopamine is a neurotransmitter in your brain. It's often referred to as the feel good neurotransmitter. And what happens is you partake in an action, a behavior, an experience, and there's a little release of dopamine in your brain, and that tells your brain, hey, I like this activity. Well, that's great. So it sounds good. It's a good way to reinforce positive activities. The problem, a lot of instances with dopamine is just because an activity is enjoyable doesn't mean it's necessarily good for you. And so we'll talk through that a little bit in the episode here. But what made me do this episode is I was kind of reviewing my past couple months and my routines and my habits and my productivity, and am I pushing myself to get better? And I felt like I was wasting a lot of time on non-value add activities, mindlessly scrolling through videos, not being productive, not being able to stay focused or on task. Oh, look, squirrel, getting distracted easy on stuff. And I started to think about, what's driving that? Why is it a struggle for me to stay as focused as I usually am? Because when I am focused, I can usually get intensely focused, much more so than most people. And I don't know if it's a skill that I developed from athletics, where I was good at athletics because I had that skill. It's probably a little from column A and a little from column B. But, when I was a hitter, I was a pretty good hitter. Even though I pitched in college, I was a pretty good hitter. And people would ask me, how do you hit a slider? And I would say, well, you got to look for the little red dot on the front of the ball. Because when someone throws a slider, the way the ball spins, there's the seams on a baseball form a little red dot right on the front of it. And if you see that, the pitch is going to move from a right-hander. Let's say you're a right-handed batter, it's going to move down and away from you. If you're a left-handed batter, it's going to move down and into you. But if you don't see that dot, you don't know that the pitch is going to break and you're going to swing and miss at it. And people would tell me, well, I can't see the dot. I would say, well, you can't hit a slider. I don't know what to tell you, because that pitch is not going to be where you think it's going to be, because it's going to move largely in the last 15 to 20 feet of the pitch. And so, I have a very intense ability to focus. Another story on that. So my wife and I took an online class one time, and it was in just behavior and understanding how people think and behave very differently. So one of the tests to kind of prove this was there was 5 people. They were all dressed in black. It was a nondescript room, so there wasn't anything to distract you, and they were all holding an iPad. And of the 5 of them held the iPad right in front of them, and then they moved the iPads kind of slowly up and down like this. They said, for 1 minute, we're going to flash different colors on these screens. There was 5 screens. And the goal was, you need to tell me how many times red appears on any screen in 1 minute. So the idea here was to focus on the screens, look for red, and count that in your head. So both my wife and I took this test at the same time. And they get done and said, okay, so compare your answers if you're in a group or whatever. And I said to my wife, how many did you count? And she said 29. And I said, really? She said, how many did you count? I said 62. And turns out the answer was 63. So I was laser focused, and I missed one somewhere, but I performed well on that part of the test. Then he says, how many of you noticed me dancing around behind these people in a bumblebee costume? I was like, what's he talking about? My wife says, how did you miss that? And so it just goes to show you that people process things and their brains work very differently. But from a dopamine perspective, all of our brains release dopamine in different circumstances. So our brain is telling us, hey, I like that behavior, or you're telling your brain, I like that behavior. And so if you get used to that release in your brain's going to ask for more of it. That's a good thing if it's eating vegetables and that releases dopamine, or if you go for a run and that releases dopamine, or you write in your journal and that releases dopamine. Now, it's not so good if you're at McDonald's and it releases dopamine, or you smoke and it releases dopamine, or you gamble and it releases dopamine, all of which are true, by the way. And some of us don't struggle controlling those things at all, and some of us have big struggles with some of those things. And so it's a challenge. But I got to thinking about dopamine and said, I wonder if I was gonna focus on breaking habits, how would dopamine play into it? So that's what led to the article, or the episode that we're talking about today. So the challenge is some of the bad behaviors. I don't know if they're bad behaviors, but there's certain behaviors that release way more dopamine than other behaviors. So it's kind of a reward system that happens in your brain, and if you understand that it's happening, it can at least help you think about it and maybe control it in a way so you can focus on the activities that do release dopamine that are good for you and work on eliminating the activities that do release dopamine that aren't so good for you. But it's wildly different in terms of the amount of dopamine that's released. For example, uh, let's say you have an orgasm, right? That's a good thing. That's a fun thing. That's something that we're all looking for. That releases 200 units of dopamine. Now, that same person uses methamphetamine. That methamphetamine can release 1,250 units of dopamine. So quick math tells you got to have 6 orgasms to equal 1 hit of meth. And that's not necessarily good for any of us, right? So that's a challenge. Other harmful activities or activities that could be harmful depending on moderation, depending on circumstance. Social media use, drug use, alcohol use, playing video games, gambling, and the consumption of comfort foods. So, it's funny. We went to Costco the other day. We hadn't been in about a month and a half, and we do most of our big shopping there simply because we've been Costco customers for 30 years. We know what they have. We feel like they bring a lot of value for the money. And we had a whole bunch of stuff in our cart. We spent a lot of money. It was over $500. And we were checking out. They check the receipts at Costco. And the woman was a nice old lady named Kay. And she said, "Did you find everything you need?" And I said, "I think we found more than we needed." And she jokingly said, "Well, you'll be happy you've got it when you're downstairs in your underwear at 3 a.m. looking for something in the fridge. And then you have to drive to McDonald's because it's not in your fridge." And I didn't hear her say all of that, but my wife did. And so when we got in the parking lot, my wife said, "Did you hear what she said?" And I said, "Well, I heard her say, you'll be glad that you did when it's 3 a.m. And then my wife told me the part about you're down in your underwear and you got to drive to McDonald's. And I turned to my wife and I said, "Does she have a fucking camera on our house?" My wife laughed hysterically. But yeah, I fall victim to that myself. Like late at night, if everyone's in bed, I will hop in the car and go get something absolutely unnecessary, totally unnecessary. And I think that's could be related to dopamine. So if I can associate it, and the way my brain works, if I can associate it with something, it gives me a better chance of short circuiting it. So what I started doing was instead of that, I take my dog for a walk. So it gets me out of the house. It's not eating. It's a healthy activity. I live in a safe neighborhood. So that releases dopamine as well. A lot less than whatever, a Big Mac value meal or whatever you're going to get. But all of those things that I just talked about release dopamine. Now, one of the other challenges you have is that excessive release of dopamine can overstimulate your brain. And you can develop kind of an immunity to it so that a unit of dopamine doesn't have the same effect as a unit of dopamine used to have on your brain because you've developed a tolerance to the dopamine. So you've got to really kind of think about that. It can damage the neurons in your brain and makes them less sensitive to dopamine. And that's how you kind of build up that tolerance. And that happens a lot with substance abuse. So there's very legitimate reasons why some people struggle with substance abuse. With all of that said, we are all still responsible for our actions. I totally understand that it's a lot harder for some people. I personally have never been drunk in my life. I've never touched an illegal drug in my life. I have no desire. It's never looked fun to me. I didn't drink in high school. I didn't drink in college. I've literally never been drunk in my life. And that's not a badge of honor. It's not a brag. It's just a statement of fact. Now, that's easy for me. But a lot of people can just walk by a piece of cake and say, no big deal. For me, I'm like, ooh, look, cake. So we all have things that we struggle with, and we're all responsible for our own decisions. So you can't use these things as an excuse to not work on changing that behavior. That's where we have to challenge ourselves as people that, hey, this is harder for me for whatever reason. I use math a lot as an example. Like math comes naturally to me, always came naturally to me. When I was in grade school, I used to play, the flashcard race where the two people and you throw the flashcard, whoever gets the answer first steps forward. I played my teachers because I couldn't play with any kids that I was in school with because I was faster than them. It just clicked in my head and I had quick recall and blah, blah, blah. So even though like I struggle with food, okay, that's my cross to bear. That's my job to work on. There's advantages that you're born with too. So don't just focus on the negatives. There's certain things that you have kind of a natural tendency to be good at, and that's good. So don't worry about that. Um, so one of you got to be prepared for some of the symptoms that you're going to encounter when you try to wean yourself off of these dopamine hits that you've derived from whatever the behavior is that you're trying to change. The brain can become more sensitive to discomfort and nervousness. So if you're naturally anxious, if you're naturally worried, I'm not, but my wife is. And so if you're those things, when you're trying to get off of something and the dopamine shortage starts to hit you, your brain's going to kind of heighten that sense of discomfort and nervousness, and you have to figure out a solution for that. And the best way I've thought about solutions is to find a replacement behavior. Like I talked earlier, instead of eating, I'm going to get up and go for a walk. Now that works for me. You can figure out whatever works for you, but to just think you're going to white knuckle it through those periods and just grit your teeth and stop yourself from that behavior, I have not found that to be a recipe for success for myself. And I have not heard of a lot of people that use it as a recipe for success for them. So my encouragement is to figure out what the replacement behavior is going to be and then substitute that replacement behavior when you get those feelings of angst or discomfort or anxiety or you're feeling edgy or whatever you want to describe it. We all know what that feeling is, where you've got some type of an urge or a craving. You're trying to fight it off. You've got to replace whatever the activity is that you're trying to stop with a more productive activity. I think that's the right way to think about it. And so it's really no different than an addict coming off of their high. When that dopamine, you're used to that dopamine hit and you don't get it, you've got to find something to do to replace that. So, what are some of those symptoms that can be triggered with that anxiousness or discomfort? Lack of motivation, feelings of nervousness, irritability, hopelessness, and exhaustion. So, if you're real tired all the time, that's your body saying, oh, I usually get this pick me up of dopamine and I'm being denied that pick me up of dopamine. I've always found I get actually more energy after I exercise. I'm more awake, I'm more alert, I feel better. That's why I chose the walking as my replacement activity. You can do whatever works for you, but keep that in mind. Difficulty concentrating and other cognitive changes. If you go back to what I was talking about earlier, why I'm doing this episode is I was kind of inspecting my own life and saying, hey, I got to get better. I'm not performing at the level I know I can perform at. And that's on me to figure out what's causing that and fix it. No feelings of pleasure from things you used to enjoy. So, did you used to love to do activity X and you no longer love to do activity X? You probably aren't getting the same buzz from dopamine during that activity that you were originally getting from it. So, think about that. You may need to change that up. You may need to replace that activity. You may need to up the ante on that activity if it's something super healthy. Maybe it was walking and you want to go to running. Maybe it was writing in your journal and you want to write a book. Maybe it was eating healthy food and now you want to do a cookbook with healthy recipes. Maybe that will help replace some of that dopamine surge that you were getting from that activity. Difficulty sleeping, socially withdrawing, low libido. Those are all symptoms as well. So think through those things and try to identify, do I have these symptoms? If so, what do I think is causing it? What are the activities that are causing that? And two ways to think about it. One, am I overdoing an activity? Am I using social media too much? Am I drinking too much? Am I eating too much? Am I whatever too much? Or did I used to do things that gave me this dopamine rush and I no longer do them? I used to be religious about taking my walks and now I'm not. I used to go to the gym 4 times a week and now I don't. I used to read books every night and now I don't. Whatever the activity is that you used to do that was giving you that dopamine surge, if it was a good activity, then figure out how to get it back in your life. Replace one of your bad habits with that habit again. And if it's a bad habit, if it's something you're trying to stop doing, find a replacement for it so you have a substitute when that urge or that craving starts to hit you. So, how do you overcome the dopamine addiction? What do you do to get rid of it, to get past it? The first one, and this is a tough one, pause addictive behaviors. So, one way to do it is just stop doing whatever it is you're struggling with. Just give yourself a 30-day challenge. I'm not going to look at social media for a month. I'm not going to post on Facebook for a month. I'm not going to smoke a cigarette for a month. Now, that last one, maybe use nicotine gum. Maybe you use Zyn because it's got nicotine in it. It helps you get off of the cigarettes. It's tough to overcome a chemical addiction like that, but it's your best bet to get to where you want to be. So you've got to stop those addictive behaviors. If you're me, so no fast food, say no fast food. I'm not going to eat fast food for a month. I don't care. There's plenty of other things you can eat that'll keep you alive. You don't need those things in your life. But you've got to be focused on it, and you've got to find a replacement. Maybe instead of fast food, you have an apple at night. Give yourself, hey, I can eat as much fruit as I want every night. And maybe that will help get you through what you need to get through. Like for me, it's the walk. So, and that leads to identify what your triggers are and have a plan to short circuit them. I don't struggle at all during the day. It's not hard for me to not eat very much food during the day. For some reason at night, that's a struggle for me. So my triggers are at night, and it's usually because I'm bored or usually because I'm thinking about or planning out in my head, I got to do this tomorrow and do that tomorrow and do that tomorrow. And because I'm not taking action right then, I start to internalize those things. And I think that's what leads me to make the decisions that I make. So I can just get up and start working too. There's nothing stopping me from doing that. But you have to identify the triggers and you have to have a plan to short circuit them. Have a support system. You know somebody else that struggles with what you're struggling with, or there's other people out there that are struggling with what you're struggling with. Find those people. Talk about strategies they've used to help them change these behaviors or habits. Talk about strategies maybe you can help somebody else. Maybe you feel really good because what you're doing is working for you, and you share that with someone and it helps them change that behavior in their life. And then the last one is adopt healthy lifestyle behaviors, right? That's something I think all of us strive for. We all want to feel good. We all want to live a long time. We all want to be healthy. We all want to set a good example for our family and friends. Fight for those things. Fight to get those into your life. If it's eating, if it's exercise, if it's journaling, if it's practicing gratitude, if it's communicating better with the people you care about, those behaviors can replace a lot of the negative behaviors or unhelpful behaviors that are in your life. So think about it from that perspective. But adopting healthy lifestyle behaviors is one of the best ways that you can kind of even out that dopamine in your brain and really help you manage your activities and help you stay focused and productive in what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you found that helpful. It was helpful for me to put the episode together because it really kind of made me kind of refocus on, hey, you're not doing a very good job of this. You got to hold yourself accountable. Nobody else is going to hold you accountable. Nobody else is responsible for your behavior. You're responsible for your own behavior. That's the kind of self-talk I have in my head. And that's what made me do the episode. And I hope you find it useful because putting the episode together and sharing it with you guys was very useful for me. So if it was, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe to our channel on whatever platform you consume it on. And also don't forget to head over to our website, saltygingertalk.com. We send out a daily newsletter. You can sign up for our newsletter on that website. You can also find all of our podcast episodes on that website and links to all of our other content on social media. But don't do too much social media. Get out there and live your life. Hopefully you find what we're talking about helpful and productive, and it helps you be more productive. So thanks again, everybody. Everyone have a great week, and we'll see you next time.